6 people confessed to 2 murders that may never have happened, and to this day, no bodies were ever found. In the winter of 1974, across the frostbitten volcanic landscape of Iceland, 2 ordinary men named Guðmundur Einarsson and Geirfinnur Einarsson vanished into thin air months apart without a single trace, triggering the most chilling miscarriage of justice in the island nation's history. If tales of bizarre historical mysteries captivate your soul, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more dark stories. Long before the terror gripped the public consciousness, Iceland was a peaceful, isolated society of small coastal towns where doors were rarely locked and strangers stood out like ghosts in the snow. It was a place defined by endless winter nights, howling Atlantic gales, and a profound, bone-chilling quiet that wrapped around isolated communities like a heavy wool blanket. In late January of 1974, 18-year-old Guðmundur Einarsson finished attending a lively local dance in the remote Hafnarfjörður district, stepping out alone into a blinding, ferocious blizzard that reduced visibility to absolute zero. Witnesses saw him stumbling along the icy highway, desperately fighting the sub-zero temperatures, yet by morning, he had vanished entirely from the face of the earth, leaving behind only swirling snowdrifts. Months later, in the sleepy harbor town of Keflavik, 42-year-old Geirfinnur Einarsson received a mysterious late-night phone call at a local cafe, abruptly left his coffee unfinished, and walked out into the freezing darkness to an appointment that would swallow him whole. Police searched every inch of the treacherous coastline, scouring freezing fjords, volcanic fissures, and dark ocean depths, but yielded nothing except a creeping sense of dread that something deeply unnatural had occurred beneath the surface of these quiet towns. As weeks bled into agonizing months with zero leads, public panic began to poison the collective psyche of the nation, transforming ordinary citizens into paranoid neighbors suspicious of every passing shadow. The authorities faced unprecedented pressure to provide answers for the frantic families, leading investigators down dark, desperate paths that would ultimately invite psychological manipulation and chaos. What no one realized was that the official pursuit of truth was about to morph into a labyrinthine nightmare of isolation, interrogation, and fading memories. The stage was set for a series of events so bizarre and legally flawed that they would shatter all remaining trust in the justice system of a peaceful country. Because beneath the pristine white snow and the quiet coastal veneer, dark secrets were waiting to be fabricated from the very minds meant to protect the innocent. With the island paralyzed by fear and an utter void where answers should have been, the investigation drifted into a state of quiet desperation that ultimately rotted into something far more sinister. Months ticked by with no bodies, no weapons, and not a single shred of forensic evidence to anchor the wild theories swirling through the police department. Desperate for a breakthrough, investigators turned their gaze toward a volatile group of petty criminals and societal outsiders on the absolute fringes of Reykjavik, treating them less as suspects and more as empty vessels to be filled with the authorities' own terrifying hypotheses. What began as routine questioning slowly morphed into an endless psychological labyrinth of isolation and relentless interrogation under the cold Icelandic sun that never quite set during the summer months. As interrogation sessions stretched past the bounds of human endurance into days, then weeks, of solitary confinement, the fragile minds of these young people began to bend under the crushing weight of institutional pressure. They were cut off from family, denied legal counsel, and subjected to sleep deprivation so profound that the boundaries between reality, nightmares, and police suggestions completely dissolved into a gray, hazy fog. One by one, then in terrifying unison, they started to break, offering up bizarre, shifting, and deeply contradictory confessions to crimes they could not possibly have committed. They spoke of bodies buried in impossible locations, of secret lakeside rendezvous that patrols had scoured empty, and of violent struggles that forensic experts knew never transpired in the physical world. Yet, the police machinery seized upon these impossible admissions like starving wolves, treating every hallucinated detail as absolute gospel while ignoring the glaring absence of any physical proof whatsoever. The public, horrified yet utterly transfixed, watched as the narrative of 2 simple missing persons exploded into a sprawling, multi-person conspiracy involving secret societies, smuggling rings, and underground violence that seemed straight out of a psychological thriller. But beneath the mounting paperwork and the dramatic courtroom theatrics lay a haunting, inescapable vacuum, because even as the accused began pointing fingers at one another from behind bars, the chilling truth remained locked in the silent, unforgiving Icelandic landscape. There were no victims, no crime scenes, and no bodies to ever be found. As the investigation plunged deeper into the dark winter of the 70s, the entire nation of Iceland found itself trapped in an escalating psychological labyrinth where every single piece of evidence seemed to dissolve upon closer inspection. Detectives chased phantoms through howling blizzards and desolate coastal roads, desperately trying to anchor their crumbling theories to physical reality while witness testimonies shifted like coastal fog under the relentless midnight sun. Strange gaps appeared in the official timelines, with critical hours unaccounted for and crucial patrol logs mysteriously vanishing from precinct desks just as external investigators began asking difficult questions. The suspects themselves, worn down by relentless isolation and months of psychological strain, began experiencing profound hallucinations and memory distortions. Losing the delicate boundary between what they had actually lived and what their interrogators had quietly suggested to them in the echoing, windowless rooms. Psychologists later identified the haunting phenomenon of memory contamination. A terrifying psychological collapse where the human mind, under extreme systemic pressure, eventually adopts the darkest nightmares of its captors as its own absolute truth. Yet behind the locked doors of the interrogation headquarters, whispers grew about external influences, political pressures, and an inexplicable urgency to close the books on a pair of missing persons files. That had rapidly become a national humiliation. Even the alleged accomplices who came forward with dramatic accounts of nighttime burials and frantic coastal boat trips could never point to a single shovelful of disturbed earth. A single discarded personal item, or a single drop of forensic residue to substantiate their harrowing stories. The landscape itself seemed to conspire against the truth, swallowing secrets beneath glacial riverbeds and burying potential clues under centuries of volcanic ash and impenetrable winter snowdrifts. In the end, the investigation morphed into something far more disturbing than a conventional missing persons hunt. Becoming an unsettling study in how collective fear can construct an elaborate, airtight illusion entirely out of shadows, isolation, and absolute silence. As the months stretched into an agonizing eternity, the public consciousness began to warp under the unbearable pressure of uncertainty. Newspapers printed speculative nightmares, painting the tranquil volcanic valleys as sprawling open-air graves where secrets were swallowed whole. Psychologists looking back at the ordeal note a chilling parallel to mass hysteria, a phenomenon where the collective anxiety of an entire nation acts as a powerful solvent on human memory. People began to question not just what happened to the two missing men, but the very fabric of their own recollections during those dark winter nights. Rumors multiplied in the damp, shadowy corners of Reykjavik pubs, whispering of hidden conspiracies and shadowy figures lurking just beyond the reach of the midnight sun. The judicial system itself seemed to buckle under the strain, desperately searching for closure in a landscape that stubbornly refused to yield any logical answers. It was an unprecedented psychological crisis for a society that prided itself on community trust and quiet transparency. Yet, beneath the official transcripts and the mounting public panic, a deeper, more unsettling question remained entirely unaddressed. How could an entire group of individuals manufacture such agonizingly detailed confessions to crimes that left not a single trace of forensic reality? The absence of evidence did not merely complicate the inquiry, it transformed the entire timeline into a surreal ghost story, where the official narrative floated completely detached from the physical world. Witnesses reported strange atmospheric disturbances and sudden, inexplicable blackouts during the hours of interrogation, adding a layer of eerie folklore to the modern police files. Families of the accused watched helplessly as their loved ones were slowly consumed by an invisible psychological machinery, one designed to extract guilt from empty air. Even decades later, criminologists studying the transcripts find themselves paralyzed by the sheer coherence of the falsehoods, wondering how human minds could construct such an elaborate labyrinth of self-incrimination without a single physical anchor to hold the terrifying illusion together. As the public watched these surreal confessions unfold across newspaper headlines, a profound societal panic gripped the quiet island nation. Never before had Icelandic society faced such a chilling inversion of justice, where the traditional sense of safety in a tight-knit community was completely shattered. Legal scholars from neighboring Scandinavian countries began to scrutinize the systemic flaws that allowed prolonged isolation to warp human testimony so thoroughly. They pointed out haunting parallels to historical witch trials, where intense pressure compelled innocent souls to invent elaborate confessions to appease their tormentors. Yet this was the 20th century, supposedly governed by rational jurisprudence, making the descent into cognitive dissonance all the more terrifying. The media found themselves trapped in a bizarre feedback loop, reporting details dictated entirely by exhausted minds that could no longer distinguish between dream and reality. Citizens walking the snowy streets of Reykjavik suddenly looked at their neighbors with lingering suspicion, wondering if the tranquil facade of their peaceful capital hid vast, unfathomable shadows. The psychological fallout extended far beyond the courtroom walls, permanently altering how the nation perceived the reliability of memory. Authority and the fragile nature of truth itself were brought into question, creating deep societal fissures that would take generations to heal. Even as years bled into decades, the haunting echo of those impossible testimonies remained etched into the national consciousness, refusing to fade away quietly. Decades after the gavel fell and the prison doors closed, the shadows of the past refused to disperse. Culminating in a historic legal reversal that officially cleared the names of the accused. Yet, exoneration on paper could never truly stitch together shattered minds. Or return the years stolen by isolation and unending interrogation. The physical remains of Guðmundur Einarsson and Geirfinnur Einarsson were never found. Leaving their final resting places an eternal secret swallowed by the volcanic earth. Today, the chilling legacy of the case serves as a dark monument to human fallibility. Proving how easily the human mind can fracture under relentless psychological pressure. It remains the most profound enigma in Icelandic history. A terrifying reminder that some questions are destined to linger in the cold Arctic wind forever. If you want to uncover more spine-chilling mysteries from the darkest corners of human history, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification.